administration's immigration crackdown really being felt in Georgia. Hundreds of federal officers raiding a massive Hyundai electric vehicle plant that was being built in southeast Georgia. So this happened yesterday, not too far from Savannah. In all, 475 people were detained in what is being described as the largest operation in the history of Homeland Security investigations. Several agencies were involved here. And on that same day, hundreds of miles north in upstate New York, dozens of workers at a family-owned plant that makes nutrition bars were arrested during an ICE raid. Joining us now is former acting director of ICE, John Sandwig. John, it's good to have you with us. When we look at, first of all, this raid in Georgia, again, multi-agency raid. We learned from officials a short time ago this was really the result of a months-long investigation. Of the 475 people who were detained, they were largely Korean nationals. It's actually more than a third of the workforce at this plant. When it comes to a raid of this size, how does it all come together? We talk about a months-long investigation, but where does that actually begin? Is it a tip, typically?
Yeah, Eric, I think this is something that's really reminiscent of what we saw a lot of in the George W. Bush administration, where ICE did a lot of these large worksite raids. Typically, it begins from a tip, or, really what happened here is the administration said we want to restart these raids. Would have told HSI, the criminal investigative side of ICE, months ago to start looking for appropriate targets. ICE then uses a number of tactics. It could be tips. It could be looking at payroll records for anomalies. It could just be what's called an I-9 audit, where you go in and you look at the immigration paperwork we all fill out when we get a new job. Either way, ICE gets a lead on that. Now, we know they had a criminal search warrant, so they had to go to a magistrate and demonstrate there's probable cause for a criminal investigation. Typically, the target of that investigation is the employer, but let's be real, too. The benefit to ICE are twofold. One is they make 400 arrests. They like that. They like the civil immigration side. It helps them meet that quota. But then the second piece of this is this deterrent message, Erica. And what we're seeing throughout all these immigration actions is that kind of the subtext to it is putting, driving immigrants to leave the country, whether that's scaring employers to try to eliminate jobs, or just making people feel fear that they're not safe at work. And you can't lose sight of that implicit message here, which is trying to encourage that self-deportation.
Does this, when we couple this with the fact that there was a separate raid at this plant in upstate New York yesterday, does this signal to you a shift in the strategy at all?
I think it's part of the strategy. Again, I think we've seen this on a much smaller scale in LA. We've seen a little bit of this in DC and across the country. ICE likes these type of operations because they can arrest large quantities of people. You get to a work site, you get to these lower wage, where there's lower skilled employment, you're going to find large numbers of migrants. What's different with this raid in Georgia is it's a very large operation. It took months of planning to get to. And Erica, I think we're going to see more of these. There are undoubtedly more of these that have been in the planning stages. They've been in the planning stages since the beginning of the Trump administration. They're going to start coming online. But I think it fits into this larger puzzle. Of course, Erica, the problem with these raids, and the reason why these raids were de-emphasized during the Obama administration, is you don't find criminals there. The MS-13 gang members, your transnational cartel members, who might have infiltrated the U.S., they don't work in these factories. That's not who you arrest there. So it's more about the volume of people they arrest, but not really the quality when it comes to public safety. Yeah,
we're hearing about a number of people who may have overstayed their visas, for example. There are also, it's also fascinating to me. You mentioned that if this was a months-long investigation, they could have been looking for an appropriate site. This site in particular, the fact that there was this EV battery plant being built there, the president touting Hyundai's investment in the United States back in March, specifically highlighting its efforts in Georgia. Typically, what would the communication and or even the coordination be between the administration, letting the president know, for example, and Homeland Security or ICE when it comes to a raid like this?
Yeah, typically, Erica, this is not, obviously, things are not always as typical in this administration as with other administrations. Typically, though, you would try to divorce those two things, right? You would not want the politics to be driving whether it's an appropriate target. There could be communications. You could alert the White House that such a large, high publicity operation is going to happen. You would need to do that carefully through White House counsel, through appropriate channels. I don't think this is driven so much by the politics, though, as it was by the opportunity that they thought this presented to make a large number of arrests. But again, difficult to say, right?
Yeah, and it's also because we had, conflicting or shifting comments, I should say, from the president over the summer, announcing that farm workers, for example, would not be targeted. And then taking that back just a number of days later. I also just want to get your take before I let you go on Chicago. So the city itself bracing for this potential deployment, maybe of the National Guard. I spoke with the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois a short time ago. She said they are expecting increased immigration actions likely to begin tomorrow. Based on what we have seen in Los Angeles, even the crime efforts here in Washington, D.C., some of which have resulted in some immigration action, is this, in your eyes, is this an effective immigration tool for this administration?
Erica, my concern with it is this. We're pulling FBI agents, we're pulling Homeland Security investigations agents, and we're pulling ICE ERO officers off of what they would otherwise be doing to focus on these kind of operations. To date, in LA and DC, what we've seen them arrest are your run-of-the-mill economic migrants. Not the people, not those gang members, not those convicted felons who've pose a threat to the U.S. And the problem is, it's not just, is it worth getting those people, but what are we losing, right? We're pulling agents off of cases who would be investigating export control, right? Stopping the illegal export of weapons technology to North Korea or Iran, or engaged in complicated, cross-border drug smuggling investigations or money laundering investigations. We're pulling agents off that beat to do immigration enforcement, but not against the high-value targets. Look, we'll see what happens in Chicago. I understand why they're drawn to Chicago. There's this political element. Illinois is also the 6th largest state when it comes to undocumented migration. And Cook County has had a very aggressive sanctuary policy that limits ICE's access to the jail. But I think the answer to these questions will be seen by what are the results of this operation? Who are the migrants they arrest? And I do think they're legitimate questions. Is it worth it? And is America safer overall when we're pulling these agents from these other responsibilities to do that kind of work?
John Sandvik, really great to have your insight and your expertise this afternoon. Thank you.